When Karen decided that my driveway was her personal HOA parking zone, she didn't realize the storm she was about to unleash due to the fact I am a profile police officer. Her SUV was parked diagonally across my property like she owned it. Karen assumed her clipboard, her trumped-up fines, and her self-important attitude gave her the authority to block my path. She believed everything within her reach, including my driveway, was hers to command. But she had no clue that sometimes the quiet neighbor she was targeting is the one best equipped to topple her kingdom. I let her revel in her petty power for a moment, feigning indifference as she strutted around, snapping pictures and scribbling notes. I even ignored her supposed security team, camped illegally at the curb, turning a blind eye while Karen documented every inch of my property as though she was preparing evidence for a trial. But everything changed when her arrogance crossed, the line blocking my driveway with her official vehicles, as if my home was hers to control. That was the moment I decided it was time to act. "Morning," Karen said, her smile as fake as the potted plants she fined people for. "I'm afraid your vehicle doesn't comply with HOA parking regulations." I didn't blink. "Karen, move your car." "Oh, I don't think so," she replied, as if she were issuing a royal decree. "I'm afraid you're in violation of HOA policy, and I have every right to enforce it." She didn't know who she was talking to. She didn't know she was messing with the chief of police. "You've had your fun, Karen," I said, pulling out my badge. "But this stops now." Her face froze, the clipboard slipping slightly in her hand. She thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. Karen thought her reign as the newly elected HOA president gave her the right to control every inch of Sycamore Heights, as though she owned it all. "Call to action. Drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached." The first moment I saw her signature shiny SUV angled across my driveway, completely blocking my path home, I knew this was the beginning of something bigger. As Karen strutted across my lawn, clipboard in one hand and her designer tablet in the other, barking orders at her so-called security team, something shifted inside me. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. This wasn't about lawn height, unapproved garden gnomes, or mailbox colors. She was waging war, targeting me personally, trying to bend me into submission. She didn't know who she was dealing with. As I stepped out of my car and called out to her, the confidence in her stride faltered. She had no idea how much power she had just handed me. The morning started like any Athera cup of coffee, a freshly pressed uniform, and a deep breath before heading to the station to face the challenges of the day. As I walked out to my car, something bright green caught my eye, fluttering under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was just another menu from the local pizza joint, but as I pulled it free, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a menu, it was an HOA violation notice. $79 for improper lawn maintenance. I glanced at my lawn, frowning. Sure, it wasn't a golf course, but it was green, healthy, and recently mowed. It looked exactly as it had for the past 15 years I'd lived in Sycamore Heights, and it had always been perfectly fine. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, turning the bright green ticket over in my hand as my coffee cooled. It was then that I heard the sound of clicking heels on the pavement, the sound of Karen Mitchell, the newest addition to our HOA board, making her morning rounds. Karen had moved in 6 months ago, and within weeks she was campaigning for a board position. Now, 3 weeks into her tenure, she was on a one-woman mission to make everyone's life miserable. I waited for her to approach, taking a deep breath to keep my composure. "Good morning," Karen greeted in her sugary, sweet voice, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I held up the notice, trying to keep my tone polite. "Miss Mitchell, mind explaining this? My lawn meets all reasonable standards." She barely glanced at me, her eyes fixed on the screen of her tablet as she tapped away. Section 7. Paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines clearly states that grass height must not exceed 3 inches. Yours is approximately 3.5 inches. She said it as though she were stating an undeniable fact, completely unbothered by the absurdity of it all. "Karen, I've been a bit busy this week with a major case at work," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "I'll mow it this weekend." "Rules are rules," she chirped, her fingers still flying across her tablet. "The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. I gritted my teeth, but Karen wasn't finished. Oh, she added, looking up for the first time. And you might want to do something about those garden gnomes. They're not on the approved decoration list. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. My garden gnomes? They've been here for over a decade. My late wife collected them. New board, new rules, Karen replied cheerfully, waving her tablet in the air. We're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations lowering property values. With that, she clicked her heels and continued down the sidewalk, stopping at my neighbor Sarah's house next door. Sarah was an ER nurse who'd just finished a grueling night shift, and the last thing she needed was Karen's harassment about her garbage bins being out too long. As I watched Karen take photos of Sarah's property, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about my lawn or my gnomes anymore. Karen wasn't just being strict, she was targeting specific residents. In my car, I pulled up the neighborhood Facebook group, scrolling through post after post about Karen's antics. The complaints were piling up. Mark the firefighter fined for his kid's basketball hoop, the elderly couple across the street written up for their unapproved rose bushes, and even the local teacher cited for parking his car in his own driveway because it was unsightly. Karen's reign wasn't just about enforcing rules. She was wielding her power like a weapon, systematically targeting the hardworking people who kept our community running, the first responders, the elderly, the teachers. I knew I couldn't let this continue. 2 days later, Karen pushed me past the breaking point. I arrived home after a brutal double shift, dealing with a downtown bank robbery, exhausted and ready to collapse onto the couch. But as I pulled into the street, I saw them two black SUVs with HOA Security plastered on the sides, completely blocking my driveway. Karen was there, of course, strutting across my front lawn in her designer suit, snapping photos of everything from my garden hose to my welcome mat. I stepped out of my car, my exhaustion replaced with fiery determination. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice steady despite the anger boiling under the surface. "You're blocking my driveway, and I need to get to my garage." Karen spun around, her blonde hair swishing as she faced me with that same fake smile. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson," she said sweetly, "our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker." She tapped her tablet screen with exaggerated flair, reading off my supposed offenses. Let's see. Unpaid fine for lawn height violations, unapproved garden gnome placement, and now non-regulation mailbox color. I couldn't help but laugh. Non-regulation mailbox color? Karen, it's white. It's been white for 15 years. Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly pleased with herself. According to our new guidelines, approved last week, all mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is clearly classic white, completely different shade. Karen lifted her chin higher, her smug confidence radiating from every word. "Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson," she said with an air of superiority that made my blood boil. HO rules apply to everyone equally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to document a few more violations before I process the additional fines for your uncooperative behavior. She strode away, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor, heels clicking against the pavement in her self-satisfied march to inspect more properties. But I didn't move. I stood there in the driveway, watching her back disappear down the street, knowing this wasn't the end. In fact, this was just the beginning. Karen thought she had untouchable control over Sycamore Heights. She thought she could steamroll her way through our lives, leveling her clipboard like a weapon and imposing her rules on everyone without consequence. But she had no idea who she was dealing with, and her perfect HOA world was about to get a lot more complicated, especially once I started looking into exactly how these new security measures had been approved. The trouble started early the next morning, just as I was sitting down with a cup of coffee to sort through the stack of violation notices Karen had slapped on my property. The doorbell rang, and when I answered, I found Sarah standing there, still in her scrubs, her hands trembling as she held up a handful of bright orange papers. "Chief," she began, tears welling in her eyes, "they're threatening to put a lien on my house because my garbage bin stayed out an extra day." She was shaking now, barely able to hold the stack of notices steady as her voice cracked. "I worked a double shift during the bus crash, 16 hours, trying to save lives, and this is what I come home to? I glanced at the stack 7 violations in total, all signed by Karen, all for the pettiest infractions imaginable. My stomach tightened as anger surged through me. This wasn't just harassment. This was abuse of power. Sarah wasn't alone. Over the next few hours, as I started asking around the neighborhood, more stories emerged. Mark, the firefighter on Maple Street, showed me citation after citation for his kids' basketball, hooped the same hoop that had been there for 5 years without issue before Karen joined the board. The Martinez family was fined because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past Karen's arbitrary deadline. They hadn't even been home. They were at their grandmother's funeral. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow across the street, whispered nervously as she told me about cameras Karen's so-called security team had installed on streetlights without permission. "They're all pointed at specific houses," she said quietly, glancing at mine. The pattern was clear as day. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was targeting homes where people worked long or irregular hours. First responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, people who couldn't always be home to jump at her every demand. And she was targeting those who had opposed her during the HOA election. This wasn't random. This was calculated harassment. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, spreading out all the complaints, notices, and photos like pieces of a puzzle. My police instincts kicked in, the pattern revealing itself in vivid detail. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was orchestrating a campaign of control, and it was time to stop her. Then my phone buzzed a text from Tom, my deputy who lived in the next subdivision. "Chief, you're not going to believe this," it read. "Remember that flooding issue last spring? Just found out Karen's brother's company got the contract for drainage repair. Cost 3 times what the other bids quoted." I leaned back in my chair, thinking about Karen's smug laugh earlier that day, when I'd tried to reason with her about my own fine. "Rules are rules," she'd said, that condescending smile never leaving her face. But now I understood these weren't rules. This was a power trip, and possibly something even more sinister. The next day, I dug deeper, starting with the so-called security company Karen had stationed in front of my driveway. Their uniforms had looked suspiciously new, their badges peeling like cheap knockoffs. At the station, Jenny from Records ran a business check for me. Within minutes, my suspicions were confirmed. The company, Elite Neighborhood Watch Services, had only been registered 3 months ago, right after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner? Tom Mitchell, Karen's brother. The business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office, and the history wasn't just suspicious. It was damning. Karen's brother had a history of failed security companies in 3 different states. Complaints of aggressive tactics, unauthorized surveillance, and fraudulent billing practices had followed him everywhere. But he always disappeared before an investigation could take root. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. HOA financial records revealed Karen had pushed the board to increase fines while directing all security contracts to her brother's company. Property maps showed she'd extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. And public records exposed her running an unlicensed daycare from her garage, a blatant violation of the same HOA rules she weaponized against others. This wasn't just about me, or even about the first responders she was targeting. Karen had built herself a kingdom of fear and intimidation, and it was time to dismantle it. Karen had crossed lines no one else would dare, but now her empire of control was finally unraveling. The text from my sergeant had been the tipping point. "Chief, you won't believe this. That security company tried to boot Dr. Thompson's car at the emergency room entrance. He was rushing in for a critical surgery." My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. That incident was the final piece I needed to expose Karen for what she really was: not a champion of neighborhood standards, but a tyrant who used petty rules and power plays to exploit and intimidate. I sat back in my chair, staring at the mountain of evidence I had gathered over the past weeks. Property records, business licenses, financial documents, photos, first-hand accounts. It was all there, neatly organized and undeniable. Karen had left a trail of violations so egregious that even her supporters on the HOA board couldn't ignore it. The real question now was timing. When and how could I present this for maximum impact? My phone buzzed, lighting up with a new text message. Karen had just submitted a proposal for expanded security measures. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting for the next night to vote on her new community safety program. I smiled, knowing the perfect moment had just fallen into my lap. Sometimes, the best investigations are the ones where you let your target walk right into the trap they've set for others. Walking into the HOA meeting room, I felt the familiar weight of my badge in my pocket giving me strength. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm and unreadable. The room was packed with neighbors, more than I'd ever seen at an HOA gathering before. Karen stood at the front of the room, waving a stack of papers in the air, as though she were presenting a prize. Her speech was as polished as her designer suit. She talked about hiring more security guards, installing cameras on every street, and increasing patrols to protect property values and neighborhood safety. The room felt tense. The neighbors tired of her endless rules, but no one dared to speak up. I waited until Karen finished her impassioned speech and asked for votes. Then, I stood up slowly, raising my hand. "Before we vote," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "I think there's something everyone needs to know." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she tried to place me out of uniform. "For those who don't know me," I said, walking to the front of the room, "I'm Chief Johnson, and I've been investigating some concerning issues." Whispers erupted across the room, and Karen's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering onto the table. I pulled out my stack of papers, property records, business licenses, photosol meticulously organized. The projector flicked on, displaying the first image on the screen, Karen's illegal home daycare operation, complete with security footage and public record details. "These pictures," I began, my tone steady, "show an unlicensed daycare operation running out of your house, Mrs. Mitchell. That's against both HOA rules and state regulations." Karen's face turned red, her voice shaking as she tried to interrupt. "How dare you? This is private property!" "Public records aren't private," I replied calmly, clicking to the next slide. "Neither is this business registration showing your brother owns Safe Shield Security, the same company now patrolling our streets without proper licensing." The room erupted in whispers, neighbors leaning forward to get a closer look at the projector screen. I continued, my voice rising slightly to carry over the noise. "While you've been fining Sarah Thompson, our local ER nurse, for leaving her trash bins out an extra hour after her night shifts, you've been running an illegal business. While you cited Mark Rodriguez's kids for their basketball hoop, your security company has been operating without permits." Mrs. Chen stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "She fined me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations." Others began to join in, sharing their stories of Karen's targeted harassment. Karen tried to grab her papers and storm out of the room, but the HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, blocked the door. "Not so fast, Karen," he said firmly. "We need to discuss this." I clicked to the final slide on the projectorial list of violations committed by Karen's security company, including illegally blocking emergency vehicle access and issuing tickets without legal authority. "That's impersonating law enforcement," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "A serious offense." Karen's perfect mask finally cracked. "You can't prove anything," she shouted, her voice desperate. "I was making this neighborhood better. These people need rules." "Rules apply to everyone," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "Including you." Karen's face turned bright red as she slammed her clipboard onto the table. "This isn't over," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "I'll show all of you. I'll prove you can't do this to me." She pointed angrily around the room, her accusations flying in every direction. "You'll regret this. Every single one of you will pay for this humiliation." Karen didn't go down without a fight. "This is a setup," she shouted, pointing at the neighbors seated in the gallery. "They've been conspiring against me from day one." When the judge delivered the ruling, sentencing Karen to pay a $5,000 fine for her misconduct, her outrage boiled over. "This is outrageous," she screamed, her face red with fury. "I was doing what's best for the community. They're the ones ruining it, not me." Her words echoed through the courtroom, but they did little to sway the judge, who maintained a stern demeanor. Karen had lost, and she knew it.